Hello, everybody, and a good, very early morning to people on my side of the world. Um, we are about to proceed with chapter 17 and on for Behemoth, my novel in progress. I call it in progress because it's yet to be formally edited or anything of that nature, so there might be some mistakes, but it's been a heck of a journey and a real help in capitalizing on my insomnia time instead of just laying in bed. Um, Thank you guys for taking this journey with me. I'm not sure what I'm going to read after I'm done with Behemoth. Part of me wants to maybe read like the novels that I've actually published, which are a lot cleaner than the other ones, but we'll have to see. Um, anyway, thank you guys so much for those of you who have tuned in and watched this, either, on Facebook, YouTube, doesn't matter. I really appreciate all of your help and support. Um, Momo is, of course, here beside me, uh, unable to sleep as well, huh, kitty cat? Okay, you don't have to bite me to prove your point. Yeah, she's a sweetheart sometimes. So, let's go ahead and start at chapter 17. Um, where last we left off, Levia's been acting weird, and Sam just discovered it's because whenever Ishmael told her to do whatever she wanted, it was treated as a command by the bridal, and because of that, that means that Levia has no impulse control. So we're going to see where that leads us. So, chapter 17. I stood at the back of the car, leaning against the rail with a sigh. The wind swept around me, a loud roar that seemed to even drown out my stressful thoughts. The door behind me opened as my redhead travel companion stepped outside to lean against the rail next to me. Was it that bad? She asked after a moment of silence. Yes, I whispered. It blew my dreams about the horse out of the water. It was terrifying. You know we'd never hurt you, right, Ishmael? I suppose I deserve that, she sighed, nudging me with her hips. Hey, smile. It's almost over. No, it's not, I grumbled. I get back my father, maybe even get lucky and seal Behemoth too. It won't matter. His forces will still come after me. Then I have to contend with Leviathan, who's even more terrifying. And finally, there's your mother. I waited for her to say something, but she didn't. Instead, she just turned to look at me patiently. What? Nothing? No. Well, you could release her or something. Sam smiled at me. I told you I'd give you time, didn't I? I didn't return her expression. Levy and I spoke a little after you left, she tried. We came up with some ideas for how to help make this ordeal less stressful. Or rather, how to not make it more stressful. Still, I didn't have anything to say. What could I say? Thanks for doing something you should have been doing the whole time. Sam sank when I didn't respond. I'm sorry, Ishmael. I looked at her. Was she telling the truth? I questioned, finally. I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to know the answer, but somehow the question was gnawing at my brain. It was just so difficult to fathom that Sam could have feelings for me. Telling the truth about what? About you and me? The phoenix turned bright red in embarrassment as she leaned against the railing beside me. She was struggling, I could tell. I didn't know if that was a yes or not. Maybe it wasn't anything. Maybe it was a maybe. I can't say. You can't say. In your house, we made an agreement. I wouldn't tell you how I felt until after we rescued your dad. For your sake. My sake? Why do you keep repeating me? Why do you keep not making any sense? I challenged. For my sake, Sam, I'd rather you get it all out on the table. I know that's difficult to ask for, but you can't possibly think that leaving me in suspense is any better than. I cut myself off, shaking my head in disbelief. You wouldn't have been in suspense if Levia kept her promise, she grumbled. Besides, does it even really matter? I know you have a thing for Levia. I imagine that kiss put you over the moon. What are you talking about? I scoffed. I know that you intend to ask Levia to live with you after all this is over. If you have feelings for her, Ishmael, that's fine. I don't want to stand in the way of you being happy. I just wish. Sam, I cut her off. There's nothing between Levia and I. You do know that, right? Well, yeah, not now, obviously, but Sammy, I interrupted again. Don't get me wrong, I like Levia. She's a good friend, just like you are a good friend. But asking her to live with me? I have no idea what you're talking about. Her eyes grew at least twice their size as her mouth opened and closed like a fish, trying to formulate some sort of response to my words. Soon she at least managed to start sentences, but they never seemed to come out. But, I mean, I thought, if you're worried that some sort of romance will ever come between our friendship, Sam, don't. You and I have known each other for a very long time. In the entire time we've known each other, have I ever doubted your judgment on anything? You doubted my judgment on Levia, she pointed out. Do you still think she's bad news? I accused. Sam hesitated for a moment. I could tell she didn't want to answer the question before she surrendered with a half-hearted, no. As much as I trust your judgment, Sam, I also know that you have a tendency to make a knee-jerk reaction. A very overprotective knee-jerk reaction. Remember when you hired Eric at the pier? You nearly fired him the next day because you thought he was bullying me, when the truth was we hadn't said two words to one another. Well, yeah, but you don't have to explain, Sammy. You're my best friend, and that's what we do, right? We look out for each other. I know that when you left me alive in the beginning, it would most likely cause you some trouble. Don't think I didn't consider that. Ishmael, I really did intend to look for you. Lavia wasn't just saying that. She was mad because I snuck away from the museum to find you. I know it may seem like I don't care sometimes, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Sammy was beginning to tear up. If I hug you, will it stress you out? She asked. I had to stifle a laugh before shaking my head. A hug from you is always welcome, I swore, before turning around and wrapping my arms around her. We stood there for a few seconds, embracing one another. But getting back to my question, is it true? I don't know if I'm ready to tell you yet, she whispered, not wanting to let go. Despite that all but answered my question, I nodded in understanding. Okay. Okay? If you're not ready, I won't rush you. Some of us have more consideration for that than others, I teased before tapping the tip of her nose with my finger and releasing her. She smiled sheepishly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. As I went to leave, she grabbed my arm to stop me for a moment. Seriously, if you're ready so quickly, I'm going to start thinking you're doing this on purpose. Listen, something's wrong with Levia. Sam. No, not like that, I mean. Did you order her to do whatever she wanted? 'Cause right now, that's what's happening. She can't help herself, and she has to keep doing what she wants. That can be dangerous, Ishmael. You need to fix it. I don't know what you did or how you did it, but seriously, she's probably not in the best of places right now either. God, that crazy girl's going to be the death of me, I groaned. Thanks, Sammy. I'll take care of it. Do you mind giving the two of us about 10 minutes? Nothing against you, but I know Levia wants to keep this private. I understand. I smiled before leaving her there to return to the room. I paused for a moment just outside the door. Looking to make sure Sam couldn't see me, I quickly took my sock off and placed it on the door handle before going back in. Okay, so it was a dumb prank. But I consider this payback for her little loop-the-loop stunt she pulled on the way to the Altai Mountains. Levia, I called as I slipped into the room. My jaw dropped when I found the Kelpie in her My jaw dropped when I found the Kelpie with the entire upper half of her body out of the window of the rail car. Christ, was she trying to get herself killed? Rushing to her, I grabbed the back of her shirt, pulling her in just as a rail switch nearly took her head off. Oh, hi, Ishmael, she beamed at me, hugging me tightly. Sam said she wanted to talk to you, but I said you needed space. Olivia, why didn't you tell me that the bridal was messing you up like this? I asked, exasperated. You didn't think I wanted to be here. You didn't know if you wanted to be here, I argued. Well, now we both do, she beamed. I held out my hand for the bridle. Give it here, I instructed. You'll have to catch me first, she giggled, turning to run, but before she could, I just grabbed her arm. No, Ishmael, you have to actually chase me, she tried to explain, but I just reached to rummage in her jacket pocket before pulling it out anyway. Lavia, I started, holding the small metal fixture in my hands. When I said do whatever you want, I didn't mean do anything that popped into your head. I know, she murmured, but I can't help it. You worded it wrong. Well, I'm going to fix that now. Levia, I want you to make your own choices from here on out. Save this instruction. No other instructions given with this bridle are to be followed unless you choose to follow them. I then pressed it back into her hand with a smile. How was that? Wonderful. She smiled before once again throwing her arms around me in a tight hug. Don't worry, it worked. I'm just really happy to have you, Ishmael. I'm really happy to have you here too, Lev. Lev? She repeated, testing it out. Never had a nickname before. I kinda like it. I'm glad, I chuckled. Can I call you Ish? I'd rather you didn't. Well, too bad. I can make my own choices now, she teased, just as the door slammed open, revealing Sam, who was clutching the sock in her hand. Ishmael, she snapped, fury in her eyes. That is not funny. Actually, it's hilarious, I replied, snatching the sock from her. Payback, Sammy, and man, does it feel good, too. I swear to you, if you do something like that again, I will not hesitate to light you on fire. And when you do, I'll be right there to put him out again, Olivia interjected, giving me a wink. I'm sorry, guys. Let me grab a bottle of water real quick. Just take your times for a sec. Sorry about that, everybody. I've got my bottle of water. Let me go ahead and take a drink. We'll get right back to it. All right. Oh, look, you're back to normal now. Hooray, Sam sighed before sinking into her chair. Well, at least you're in better spirits, Ishmael. That's good enough for me. A slight ping came from the overhead speakers before going into some Azerbaijani message. It looks like we'll be stopping in cars in half of an hour, Levia stated, looking up towards the speaker. You speak Azerbaijani? I asked in surprise. Ishmael, I speak everything, Levia countered with a smug grin. How can you possibly speak everything? Sam accused. There's no way. Well, for a short time I was owned by a collector of antiquities that was a professor of linguistics at Oxford. So yes, any language that is spoken in the world, assuming they're not made up or exceedingly rare, I know them. Did neither of you find it curious that I spoke modern English? Both Sam and I exchanged glances before murmuring our excuses for not having come up with the realization earlier. Sam, I understand, but you, Ishmael? I figured you were brighter than that. Clearing my throat, I decided to change the subject. So, Levia, you've told us about your mother. What's your father like? Do you have any other family? My father, Levia began, her tone suddenly becoming more serious, is twice as cruel as my mother could ever be. If not for the fact that he feared her so greatly, I doubt he would be kept in check by anything. His name is Nucklevy. Back home in Orkney, people called him a demon. He looks like a rider that's been fused with a horse, only neither have any skin. His humanoid head is 10 times larger than that of a man's, and his arms reach almost to the ground. Sam burst out into laughter. Her hands flew to her mouth to try to hide it, but it was already too late. Sorry, it sounds so ridiculous. How is that dangerous? Does he just trample people to death? If they're lucky. Other times he grabs them by the hair and grinds their face against the road. If they survive that, he drowns them in the river. Just before they pass out, he tells them how he'll find their loved ones next. Needless to say, we're not on speaking terms. So you don't have any family who misses you? None at all? I tried to hide the hopefulness in my voice. It was so awful to think she was truly all alone. Was, I reminded myself. She smiled. Actually, I do. 2 half-brothers. Dobarchu, who is a waterhound, and Bunyip, which is, how best to put this? He's a mix between a lion, octopus, and a starfish. Immediately, images race through my head, trying to put the three animals together with little success. That's good, I suppose. So are they against your mother as well? No, I'm afraid that is still only reserved for me. Chu is a neutral party, and Bunyip is a member of my mother's army. Once he was like me, and he spoke out against her, then she did something to him. Something horrible. What did she do? I pressed. The caustic, she murmured, pulling her legs up to her chest with a shiver. I don't know how it works, but my mother takes people, sometimes screaming and begging for mercy, into a strange room. When they come back out, they are not who they once were. They've changed. It's like my mother scoops out their heart only to replace it with her own. It terrifies me to think about, and I've no doubt that if my mother hadn't been sealed away, she would have gladly thrown me into the caustic. There are horror stories that the Skyrakers tell about such a thing, Sam added. Sometimes they try and make alliances and pacts against the others. Every time someone is sent to Leviathan with something she doesn't approve of, they don't come back. Still, sometimes people claim they see other members of the family, ones they thought lost, now working with the Deep Bears to betray our own forces. When I first learned of it, I was only 16, and it still gives me nightmares. Well, what about you, Sam? How many birth siblings do you have? 10, she replied, happy to change the subject. 10? I repeated in disbelief. Well, for starters, there are my sisters, Binu, Anka, and Garuda, and Gandabarunda, they're twins. Then there are my brothers, Pitak, Seymour, Kirkis, Carmo, Fang, and Hoang, though he prefers we just call him O. Wow, I whistled. I haven't met many of them in person. O is probably the one closest to a real brother for me out of the bunch. I even modeled for him once or twice when he came through town. You're joking, I said. No, he's a fashion designer. He's really good at it, too. Last I heard, he was in Milan, but he may be heading back to Altai soon. I was a model, too, Levia commented. It's not a contest, Sam scoffed, rolling her eyes. I was a model horse, Levia smirked, causing me to start laughing. Oh, come on, Sam complained. I make bad jokes. You're always like, oh, Sam, that was terrible. She makes one and you start laughing? It was so funny, though, I argued. It was the look on your face that really sealed it all together. You're such a pain, she groaned, but her smile said that she was enjoying herself. We all were, in a sense, and it was times like these that I was glad to have them at my side. Now my only problem would be figuring out how to keep them there. Mr. Job had a headache from thinking so much about his escape. He had to get out, find his son, get him to not come to such a dangerous place. How to leave, how to run. Thoughts raced through his head in short bursts of paranoid adrenaline. Can I get some water? He coughed. The spider looked at him for a moment before giving a groan of disgust. Grabbing a pail, he filled it with fresh water and brought it to him. Here, it grumbled. I can't drink. My hands are tied. I hope you don't think I'm stupid enough to actually untie them, Hibah said, tilting the bucket to his lips. Closer, closer. There. Mr. Job slammed his head hard into the spider's, causing it to let out a hiss and fall to the ground. As it tried to grab onto something, its sharp claws managed to make thin cuts against the webbing. You damned stinking ape, he cried, rolling back to his feet. I swear I'm going to drain you of every drop of fluid until you're lying on the ground, Anne. His words were silenced when a loud, lion-like roar echoed through the chamber just as the Sphinx pounced. Crushing the large arachnid beneath her massive paws, her grotesquely human-like teeth began ripping his flesh apart as if she hadn't eaten in years. Mr. Job froze, watching in shock. He'd intended to anger the beast so it would cut him free when it went to attack him, but he hadn't expected this. Licking her lips of the thick, oozing green fluid that coated her mouth, the Sphinx turned to give a hungry gaze at Ishmael's father. So sorry for his outburst, human, she purred, padding closer to him. I imagine you hope to use his wits against him. That same plan will not work for me. He stayed silent for a long while before staring at the mangled corpse of Hibah Fofi. You killed him, he murmured, still in a daze. Yes, she grinned. And if you try anything against me, well, I've been given strict orders that you are not to be harmed. In fact, you're more than welcome to try to run if you wish. Though I must warn you, these old temples can be a real death trap. As if to accent her words, a low rumble shook the entire complex. Would you listen to that? My master is stirring. Her mischievous tooth grin set him on edge. Don't worry, you'll meet him soon enough. Sorry. Ugh. Kumi sat in her bedroom, idly braiding and unbraiding her hair as she waited with boredom for Ishmael's arrival. What was possibly taking him so long? As if the fates had aligned, Hikaru came into the room, huffing and puffing before collapsing at her mistress' feet. Mistress, news, she panted. Reaching down, Kumiho picked up her tired servant, placing her on her vanity. In time, my sweet Hikaru. Rest for a moment. Drink some water if you must. I have found the Skyrakers, she wheezed, before doing as instructed and laying down to catch her breath. Kumi placed a small dish of water for her, and she eagerly lapped at it. Thank you, mistress. I can't have my most loyal servant dying from dehydration. So where are those bird brains, Has Ishmael decided to freeze Ziz in order to mount some sort of offensive? Hikaru shook her head. No, if anything, he's refusing. Sorry. Man, I am off tonight. Maybe I'm coming down with a cold. My nose is a little stuffed up and my throat's kind of dry. Hikaru shook her head. No, if anything, he's refusing to even humor the idea. Your plan to turn Sam against them worked perfectly. She locked him in a cage and refused to let him out until he agreed to release her mother. And you left him there? Kumi said in shock. No, I freed him, mistress. Right now, all three are on the way here. I left them on the train in Georgia. We took the train from Azerbaijan, and the headquarters for the Skybreakers is in the Altai Mountains. When we left, we were moving too quickly for me to discover which one they were on. Levia can run really fast. I see, Kumi mused. Excellent work, Hikaru. And he is still unaware of my involvement? Yes, ma'am. Perfect, she beamed. There is just one more thing, Hikaru said in a way that made the smile quickly fade from Kumi's lips. She was really not in the mood for bad news. Which is... Chuck and Jack have arrived here. They are setting up an ambush at the entrance in hopes of capturing Ishmael before he gets here. Those morons, she groaned. I swear, I'm ready to ship every last one of them to Atlantis. All right, Hikaru, you are to go and deliver them my orders, word for word. They are not to lay a finger on Ishmael. In fact, they are to tell him that plans have changed and apologize for their past behavior. They need to tell him that Behemoth wishes to negotiate his release, but that he must meet with Ishmael alone. Then Chuck is to lead him to my quarters. Did you get all that? Hikaru nodded emphatically. Yes, ma'am. I'll carry out your message to them now. Anything else? Kumi considered it for a moment. Yes. Tell Jack that if he lets the other two in after Ishmael, it's his ass. Okay, mistress. With that, the loyal Hikaru padded off back through the twisting stone corridors to perform her duties. It wouldn't be long now until Kumi's new plaything arrived. She was so excited she just couldn't stand it. As a loud rumble vibrated through the temple, she smiled to herself. Don't worry, Daddy. I know exactly what I'm doing. You see. Not only will you be free, but I'll have myself a handsome little human to serve alongside me. Together we will take down Ziz and Leviathan. The world will be ours. Alright, chapter 18. Reaching our final stop, the three of us emerged, stretching out limbs now that we were back in the fresh air. How are you feeling? I asked Levia. Very well rested, thanks, she answered with a smile. There is only one problem. We'll be crossing the Red Sea. Most likely my mother will have located us and is plotting to intercept us when we cross it. Can't I just part the sea again? I questioned. If I did, they wouldn't be able to get to us. Do you really think that some of the world's most monstrous creatures can't jump through a wall of water? Think of all of the ferocious sea monsters you know of. Think of Luska. Would parting the sea stop him? I guess you have a point. So, what's the plan then? We proceed as intended, she said. If we get attacked, we'll switch you to Sam and she'll fly you to safety. But what about you? I pointed out. I don't want you to get hurt. She considered it for a moment before shaking her head. I'll be fine. I'm faster on water anyway. No offense, Sam, but I think I'll refrain from flying for the time being. Like I enjoy carrying you on my back, the phoenix huffed. I think it'd be safer for Ishmael that way anyhow. Levia stretched out one more time before shifting into the shape of the beautiful black horse. Okay, Ishmael, hop on. Next up, Egypt. I nodded, climbing onto her back. My legs pressed into her sides, fusing once more into her flesh. Now firmly adhered, she took off towards the shore, with Sam streaking through the early morning sky. For something called the Red Sea, it was shocking just how beautifully blue the water appeared. It was almost crystal clear, making me wonder just how Leviathan planned to ambush us without people noticing it. The same way people ignore a horse running at Mach 1 over water, I thought. I clutched the staff tight, carefully looking out for anything suspicious. Levia gave a sharp gasp. What's the matter? I asked. Sam, now! She cried out. The phoenix swooped down to grab me, but before she could reach, a scaled reptilian creature pounced at us. I'd never seen anything like it. It was a weird mix between an alligator and a shark, but the size of a human. Levia turned, bucking her legs outward and kicking it square in its serrated teeth. Sam! She screamed. Levia, what are those things? Taniwa. They're basically the hellhounds of the sea. But hellhounds travel in packs, I protested. There's only... My words cut off as three more jumped from the water. Two managed to grab onto Levia's flank, sinking their long claws into her. The third I struck with the staff, sending its sizzling corpse back into the waves. The moment it landed, at least half a dozen Taniwa surfaced, tearing it limb from limb in a frenzy. Oh, God, how many of them are there? I can ditch them, but not with you, Ishmael. Hold on tight. The two Taniwa on her sides became glued there, mouths forced open before they could rip the meat away. With another harsh buck, Levia sent me straight upwards, nearly 50 feet in the air. Damn, she was strong. From that height, I could see the true scale of our enemy. The once crystal blue waters beneath us were green with hundreds of these beasts. As I reached the height of my launch, Sam swooped beneath me before taking off towards the shore. Will Levia be okay? I asked. One problem at a time. Levia can take care of herself. Helpless, I watched as more of them dogpiled onto the kelpie. I thought she said she could lose them. What was she doing? Then, from the depths, an enormous green blotch appeared under the surface. This wasn't more Taniwa. Whatever this thing was, it was massive. Levia didn't stand a chance against an entire army and a monster. I had to help. Sam, take us back down now. Not a chance. We have to keep you safe. Levia is in trouble. If you don't take us down, she is going to die. We had an agreement. I'm telling you, she can handle herself. I considered it for a moment. I was about to do something really crazy and twice as stupid, but it would have to work. Without a word, I flung myself from Sam's back and began to plummet down towards the water below. Damn it, Ishmael! Sam screamed, turning to dive after me. Fluctibus in frigore! I chanted. Then I launched the staff like a bolt of lightning straight down at the sea. It struck the surface in front of Levia, causing a bright blue light to flash across the sea in a blink. The kelpie jumped into the air, grabbing the staff in her teeth as the entire sea froze into a solid block of ice. Sam's talon wrapped around my torso, gripping me tight. You idiot! You could have died! I didn't make a response. My eyes were still glued on Levia in the sea. The green shapes had stopped moving, even the massive one, and she was finally ahead. But when she landed from her jump, one of her feet slid out from under her. I watched in horror as she skidded across the frozen waves, going near the speed of sound. She slammed into the sandy embankment at the edge, leaving a long trench behind her. Oh no, I gasped. Sammy dropped me onto the beach, and I rushed to the kelpie's side. If she'd died, I'd never forgive myself. This was all my fault. When I reached her, she was completely still. I placed my hand on her neck, and when I pulled it away, it was sticky with her glue-like fur, but the grip wasn't strong enough to restrain me. Wake up, Levia. Come on, please wake up. Her form twitched as she returned to her human shape, but still she didn't open her eyes. Her body was badly bruised and scraped up from the rough surface of the water. Sammy moved to my side and wrapped her arms around me. Sam, heal her, please, like you did with me on the road. It only works for external wounds, she told me. I don't know how bad it is inside for her. If she's got a concussion or her brain is swelling. I cut her off. Anything is better than nothing. Please, I'm begging you. For me. Sammy took a breath before holding her hands over Levia's body. Fire leapt from her palms, flowing over the scrapes and bruises until soon the kelpie looked pristine. There was a sharp hiss of air as her lungs expanded. She's alive! Thank God she's alive! My tears of joy and guilt mixed on my cheeks as I held her in my arms. You did it, Sammy. You saved her. Thank you. The phoenix just stared at the way I was cradling her. The look of envy and hurt on her face was one I may not have noticed before our train ride. We can't move her like this, Sam said. On the off chance her spine is damaged, it could hurt her more. We've got two choices. Wait to see if she wakes up, or... The words hung there. We're not leaving her here, I said. Ishmael, it could be days before she... We are not leaving her. This time my voice was more firm. I knew that Sam wasn't trying to be mean. In my head, I knew the logic of the idea. We were on a timer, and that was bad. But we were so close. At the least, we wait until tomorrow. The redhead rubbed my shoulders affectionately as I stayed there beside Levia. With her black hair framing her face, her slumber seemed so peaceful despite its nature. Without a word, I stroked her cheek. I was so angry at myself for this. I tried to save her, but instead I very well may have killed her. Ishmael, what are we going to do about the sea? Sam asked, looking back at the frozen expanse. People are going to wonder what's going on. That's not really my concern right now. We can't leave it like this. Who knows what could happen if... I'm the one with the staff, and I say it stays for now. I'm not leaving her side until she's awake again. Sam scowled at me. Ah, hey, thanks for the follow. Much appreciated. This is exactly the sort of thing that she's always going on about. You are too concerned about us. You need to be worried about everyone, not to mention for yourself. You froze the entire sea. Every person, every fish, every cryptid are now frozen solid. How long do you think they can survive that way? There could be children in that ice. The thought of it hurt. So not only did I endanger Levia, but I may have inadvertently killed innocent people as well. Stay here, I whispered, scooping up the staff. When I tapped it onto the massive block of ice, it was immediately reverted back to normal. The Taniwa didn't come after us, most likely baffled by their loss of time. When I returned to Levia, I sank to my knees. The phoenix placed her hand on my shoulder to try to comfort me. She's tough, Ishmael. If anyone would pull through, it'd be her. Shut up, Sam. You don't care. You know that's not true. I don't want her hurt any more than you do. We may argue, but we're on the same side. In that moment, Levia gave a weak groan. Levia, are you in there? Sure enough, her pretty seafoam eyes opened to look up at me. I took a sharp breath, holding it in hope that she was all right. Are you okay, Ishmael? She asked. Am I okay? Of course I am. I was so scared I'd lost you for good. Never, she promised. Despite Sam and I attempting to stop her, she sat up and brushed the sand off herself. I can't believe you tried to save me. Don't be ridiculous. Of course I did. And he decided to skydive without a parachute to do it, Sam informed her. That got her attention and earned me a less than gentle slap to the face. You idiot! What the hell were you thinking? That's exactly what I said. You don't understand. I argued there was a giant Taniwa coming after you. If I hadn't done that, there was no way you could have escaped. I couldn't just ditch you to fight them yourself. Levia rubbed her temples in irritation. Ishmael, this song is getting old. Neither of us are as important in this as you. If you died, we wouldn't be able to seal Behemoth. Your dad wouldn't be rescued. But... The dark-haired young woman placed her hands on my cheeks, staring into my eyes. Listen to me. You can't save everyone, understand? A time will come that you'll be able to sacrifice yourself for someone. Do not do it. The hell I won't. I can't just watch someone die. Ishmael, if you die, there will be millions of people who die as a result. I'm not saying that people aren't worth saving. I'm trying to make you realize that there are bigger things at stake. I began to tear up before I just hugged her again. There was sound logic to her words. She was right, but still I couldn't help it. The dream I'd had on the train was one I prayed would never come true. I know. I'm just scared of losing the people close to me. And that's okay, she replied, patting me on the back. But I can say firsthand that the last thing I want is all those people's lives sacrificed for my own. I know you feel the same way, because if you didn't, you wouldn't be here. For a moment, I just stayed quiet. Right again, I just didn't know what to do about it, though. It was pretty badass, though, right? I asked, attempting to lighten the mood. Yes, it was very heroic, and we're all impressed, Sam teased, and like that the gloom lifted. Agreed. Now come on, let's go. The temple is right around the corner, Levius said. Are you sure? If you need a little rest to... Excuse me. Are you sure? If you need to rest a little, you can. The Kelpie stood, helping me to my feet. Leaning forward, she placed a kiss on my cheek. For thanks, she explained, but we still have one more rescue. Chapter 19. Like that, we were off, running towards the Nile River near Philae. I don't know if that's actually how that city's name is pronounced. I apologize to the Egyptians. I've never actually been to Egypt. Always wanted to, but I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce a lot of the names. Uh, it was amazing how beautiful the land around us was. I'd always wanted to visit Egypt. Because of the political conflicts that had been occurring for a good while, I hadn't ever been able to organize any sort of trip. While I never dreamed I'd see it from the back of a magical water horse, it was no less enjoyable, though I did wish it were under better circumstances. Well, she suddenly said, here we are. I looked around confused. We were just standing in the middle of the Nile. What are you talking about? I asked. I don't see the temple. I'm a little confused myself, she admitted. I remembered it being here. The river wasn't nearly this big last time. Sam, can you see anything? I called upwards at the circling figure. You guys aren't going to believe this, she commented. Look below you. As our eyes fell downward, we could see the remnants of buildings just beneath the water's rippling surface. What happened here? Leviathan? I asked. It looks like a dam was built some time ago, Sam observed. The valley was flooded, so they had to move the temple. I doubt they could have moved the temple with Behemoth still inside. It would have broken the seal. Maybe they only took the outer bricks and rebuilt it with new foundations, Levia suggested. Well, how do we get inside then? If Behemoth is still under here, what do we do? Excuse me. As if to answer my question, two figures emerged from the sand on the opposite side of the banks. Despite being in the desert, one wore a dark suit that I immediately recognized. We have company, I grumbled, glaring at the two. Chuck and Jack are here. Well then, let's say hello, Levia suggested, rushing towards the two of them. In her wake, water began to form into a series of hissing lances that boiled menacingly. But just as we would have reached them, they both fell to the ground and bowed their heads to the sand in submission. With a skidding halt, Levia came to a stop just as Sam also landed beside us. What are you doing? I demanded, keeping my grip on my staff tight. What's the meaning of this? Our master wishes to negotiate the terms for release for your father. We swear by the seals of the Trine that he is safe and unharmed. How can I trust you? I snapped, sliding off of Levia's back so she could stand on her own two legs again. You've both tried to kill me, numerous times. Yes, Chuck admitted, his eyes unable to meet mine. We have been reprimanded for such, rather harshly at that. As I've said, we care not for your father. If we wanted to force open the seal, we would have done so by killing him. My eyes widened. But no, that's not how that works. He doesn't have the... Save it, son of Job, Jack hissed. We know it's your blood that's the key. Our master... Chuck struck him hard in the ribs to silence him before getting to his feet and leaning on his shillelagh. What my companion here means to say is, we'd like to avoid unnecessary bloodshed, if at all possible. As you can see, it is only us two guarding the entrance here. I have strict instructions to bring you, unharmed, to our boss under the rules of parley that dictate peaceful negotiations. Do you accept? Ishmael, we can't trust them, Sam advised. Her fierce gaze locked on Jack, who still stayed low to the ground. What if he's leading us into a trap? I wish to discuss terms with your master out here, I stated. That is problematic, Chuck sighed, the frustration with the situation mounting. I fear we do not have a choice in that matter. Then no deal, Levia interjected. If I may, Mr. Job. Oh, I'm sorry, that's Chuck. I almost went Jack there. Very different. If I may, Mr. Job, Chuck began. You surely know that all these ancient Egyptian temples were built on miles of underground labyrinths. Say you and your comrades managed to defeat us both, even killing us in the process. Then what? You could wander around aimlessly for weeks until you found your father, and even then you wouldn't be guaranteed that you could find your way back out again before the gods were alerted to your presence. But, if you follow me, I'll lead you straight to my master. If I do attempt to betray you, an arduous task with the level of distrust you have towards me, well, you could always kill me with your staff, and then it's back to plan A. He had a point. Fine, I agreed. We'll follow you. I apologize, but my master's instructions were very clear. Only you are allowed to be led to the discussions. The fear is that your companion's bias may serve to influence your decision when it comes to making an agreement. Now I was even more skeptical. Then no deal. I'm not going to give you and Jack the chance to jump me without any backup, I argued. Jack is to remain out here. We've been moved to guard duty, so to speak, so one of us must be always present outside of the base. I looked to Levia and Sam. Don't do it, Ishmael, Levia warned. I don't trust them. I don't either, but we don't have much of a choice. Yes, we do, she tried. We can find your dad ourselves. Sam and I move fast enough that we could. Levia, I whispered, interrupting her. I know you're worried about me. Please don't think that I don't appreciate that. This is my father on the line. I'll have to take risks eventually. I know you're scared for me, but I have to do this. She walked up to me and hugged me tightly. Fine, she murmured in my ear. I'll let you go. But don't think for a moment that you're ever alone, okay? I will always be with you. As she said that, I felt her slip something into my pocket that I immediately recognized as her bridle. Keep that on you, no matter where you are. I will find you if you need me. I nodded, smiling as the two of us parted. I looked to Sam. No objections, Sam? She shook her head slowly. If it were my mother, she said, I'd take any risk if it meant getting her back. Levia's right. We're fast, but this is the best way for you to potentially find your father. If you're not back in 2 hours, we're going to raise hell, understand? And I don't just mean for Behemoth's forces either. I chuckled, hugging my best friend tightly. Thanks, Sam. Anything for you, Ishmael, she muttered shyly. Promise you'll be careful? I promise. Turning around, I gripped my staff tightly before nodding to Chuck. Okay, I'll meet with your boss. Lead the way. Excellent decision, young sir, he had complimented with barely contained disdain. With that, he trekked over a small dune that had rested beside them. Digging my feet into the sand, I followed after him until he showed me that the dirt led down to an opening with carved stairs leading slowly into darkness. Grabbing a torch from the wall, Chuck held it in front of him, illuminating the dark corridor, which already I could see had at least a dozen passages branching off of it. I'd made the right choice. For a long while we walked in silence. The animosity we felt towards one another was palpable in the musty air, though Chuck seemed uncharacteristically uneasy. What's eating you? I finally asked. You are a perceptive one, he grumbled. I am always uneasy when it comes to meeting my master. She is not known for being merciful, save towards those she likes. I am not one of the ones she likes. She? I pressed. I thought Behemoth was a male. He is, Chuck stated. You are meeting his daughter. His daughter? I scoffed. How is it that I keep running into the Trine's children? I've met Leviathan's daughter. Is this his daughter? I suppose it's only natural that I'm completing the collection. Yes, well, the other members of the Trine have quite a few children. It would not be unusual to run into one of their dozens, if not hundreds, of offspring. I fear that Lord Behemoth only has the one. I wonder who her mother was. I imagine that being wed to Behemoth was not an easy trial. Chuck paused, looking back at me quizzically. You don't know? You're standing in her temple. Isis? I scoffed. Behemoth's wife is the Egyptian goddess of magic? My skepticism seemed to tickle the leader of the hellhounds as he adjusted the brim of his hat. Tell me, son of Job, with as far as you've come, would it truly surprise you to find that many of the things you thought to be flights of fancy were real? I suppose not, I mused, running my fingers along the dusty hieroglyphs that lined the walls. So tell me about Behemoth's daughter. What's she like? She's the picture of contradiction, he stated cryptically. Beautiful as a desert flower, more charming than a servant, and no less deadly than a cobra. So she's a snake of some sort. Only in a figurative sense, he huffed. It is as they say, a man will do just about anything for the sake of a beautiful woman, and there have been none in all of history more beautiful than our princess. Based on the way he spat the last word, it was clear that there was quite a bit of animosity between the two. Hi, Momo. I wish you guys could see this here. She put her hand on my hand because she wanted to say hi. Yes, ma'am. Was there something you needed? I know I sometimes call you my princess, but I'm not talking about you, I promise. Okay. Look, I gotta have my hand back, okay? You can't just use your claws to try and hold my hand even tighter. That's not how that works, okay? Good girl. Despite my loyalty to my master, I always hope that you do prove to be the first to resist her charms. It would be nice to have someone on my side for a change. It may help if you didn't try to kill them, I pointed out. Either way, it doesn't matter to me. Pretty, ugly, smart, dumb. I'm only here for one reason, my father. We're here, Chuck announced, gesturing towards a modern-looking silken veil that cordoned off another chamber. Even from where I stood, I could see the vague outline of a voluptuous figure sitting at a vanity that had been placed there. Before I went in, Chuck grabbed me, straightening my shirt and brushing the sand off my shoulders. When you speak to her, you are to refer to her as ma'am, he instructed. She will offer you something to eat or drink. You will decline politely. Perhaps most importantly, she may proposition you. I highly recommend against it. What? I began just as before he shoved me through the curtain, leaving me stunned in confusion as I tried to formulate his instructions. It's about time you got here. I was beginning to get worried, Ishmael. A gentle voice greeted me from the vanity. I swallowed nervously. How did she know my name? I suppose it makes sense for Chuck to tell her. You were worried about me? I asked skeptically. Kidnapping my father and sending your goons to attack me would seem to indicate otherwise. My orders were that you were to be unharmed. As for your father, it was a necessary evil. I know all too well how hard it is to have your father removed from you. Either way, it is nice to see you again. I haven't stopped thinking about you since we last met. I hope you feel the same way. We've met? I repeated. Well, of course. She giggled before turning from her mirror to reveal the beautiful golden eyes that I'd been mesmerized by for the first moment of first encountering them. Noticing my stunned expression, her soft pink lips curled into a smile as she gave me a playful wave. Hello again, handsome. Kumi? I gasped in shock. I couldn't believe my eyes. What are you doing here? I hissed. You're the one who's been behind this the entire time? It's not like you think, she assured me, flipping her gold-pleated braid over her shoulder. I was telling the truth when I said that I was a friend. I want to get you your father back. You wouldn't have to get him back for me if you hadn't taken him in the first place. It was necessary, she pouted cutely. I promise he's been well taken care of, and we've kept him perfectly safe. I wanted you to see what it was like to have your father just out of your reach, so that you'd be more understanding of my situation. I took a deep breath, trying to control my emotions. I'm still not happy about you kidnapping him. Well taken care of, or not. However, I'm willing to keep an open mind. You wanted to negotiate the terms of your father's release? Well, here I am. What are your terms? She smiled brightly, and I thought my heart was going to melt. How could someone who I considered my biggest opposition be so adorable? Well, should I start what I want from you, or what I'm willing to give you? Take your pick. Okay, she surrendered, moving closer to me. As she circled around me, her long, soft tails ran across my cheek and under my chin. Well, obviously, I'd like for you to release my father. However, there is more to it than that. I'd also like you to join us. Join you? I repeated. What do you mean, join you? She shyly twirled one of the loose strands of hair around her finger. Well, I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a connection when we met at the airport. I've been thinking about you a lot lately, and I hope you've been thinking about me too. I know it's a bit forward, but I want to spend more time with you, just in general. You want me to stay here? Well, not here, obviously. Bleh. I'm ready to move out of this dusty, disgusting temple. I don't want to stay here any longer than I absolutely have to. But with me, I'd like you to stay with me. Maybe as my boyfriend? I was certain that every drop of blood in my body rushed to my cheeks. You're joking. She visibly sang. You don't want to? I didn't say that, I quickly corrected. Just, I'm surprised is all. I mean, yeah, I really like that. It was just kind of sudden. Now standing in front of me, she wrapped her arms around my neck, pressing herself against me. Instinctively, I held her waist, unsure of what to expect. Slowly, she leaned forward to place a kiss to my lips, but I quickly jerked away as memories of the air marshal came flooding back. What? What's wrong? Listen, Kumi, you're beautiful, really. I'd love to be your boyfriend, but how can I trust you when you kidnapped my dad and then lied to me about who you were at the airport? I've already explained why I kidnapped your father. I needed you to understand my struggle. Maybe it was a bit overkill, and I'm sorry about that, but the reason I wanted to meet you in the airport was because Levia spoke so highly of you. I was curious about the man who stole her heart. Beg pardon? I repeated in shock. I mean, I had a bit of a suspicion, but for that long? Really? Oh, you didn't know, she asked. Oh my, I probably shouldn't have said anything. I'm sorry, it isn't really any of my business. My hand slipped into my pocket, grasping the bridle in my fingers. The cool metal seemed to vibrate in my grip as I sent Levia a mental command to know that I was sorry that I hadn't noticed her feelings earlier. It's fine. I'm glad I know for certain now. Does knowing change your feeling about me? Kumi questioned, her eyes sparkling with hope. No, I admitted. Even still, what about that air marshal? You just killed him. You didn't even blink. He was trying to kill you. I couldn't let him do that. It's the reason that I demoted Chuck and Jack. It's the reason I reprimanded Hibafofi, too. You were never supposed to be hurt, Ishmael. Neither you or your father. So please be my boyfriend? Wow, you are really adamant about this, I chuckled nervously. You're interesting. The only interesting thing about me is getting tossed into this whole mess. There are other benefits to being my boyfriend, you know. You'll have all of my father's forces at your fingertips. We'll easily be able to fight against Leviathan and Ziz's forces before they can even lift a finger. A little birdie, no pun intended, has told me that you've already had a bit of a run-in with Ziz. I can't believe she locked you in a cage. Yeah, well, I murmured, I get the level of frustration she's feeling. You don't owe her anything, Kumi protested. While your father has never been in danger, they didn't know that. I bet she tried to strong-arm you with her daughter or something. I wouldn't be surprised if she was in on it, too. That's not fair, I frowned. I told her I'd consider it, so I'm still thinking about it. It's not Sam's fault. Besides, Ziz's primary offer was to help me against you. I'm just saying, you deserve better than to be manipulated by someone you trust. So, if I were to release your father, what would happen? We'd take the war to the enemy. We'd win, then we'd be the rulers of the world. Think about it. I'd be the queen of the world. You'd be my king. There would be no war, no hunger, and you'd be the one who has everything. Everyone would envy you. She leaned close to me with a smile, placing a gentle kiss on my lips. I had to use all of my will to resist kissing her back. Instead, I placed my hands on her shoulders and carefully pushed her away from me. Kumi, millions of innocent people would die. What's so innocent about the people of this world? I've seen your heart, Ishmael. I know the sort of man you are. People are cruel and evil and manipulative. Even now, the world is governed by selfish and corrupt men who abuse their power. Don't you want to put a stop to that? More than anything. I used to be naive. I judged people by what I first saw in them, and when I did that, I realized that all it would result in was being alone. If I'd done what my first reaction was, I'd have shoved Levy away. I'd have lost Sam, and I paused for a moment, the realization coming to my head. You'd what? She pressed, encouraging me to continue. I'd have fallen for your tricks in the airport, I whispered. Well, it's a good thing you didn't, I guess, she giggled. I think honesty is a very important part of a relationship, don't you? Yes, I agreed, which is why we can't possibly be in one. My second sentiment was spoken with disappointment. I'd realized my mistake now. My image of Kumi was flawed. It was a blurry photograph of what I wanted her to be like. I knew now that she could never be the Kumi I'd convinced myself to fall in love with. That Kumi didn't exist. The only Kumi that was real was the spoiled daughter of a monster who would sacrifice anyone to get what she wanted. What are you saying? She asked. You can't possibly be turning me down. I mean, are you kidding me? We're perfect together. I'm drop-dead gorgeous. I'm affectionate and loyal. What more could you possibly want? Her mask was slipping. It seemed so obvious now that I'd figured it out. Why do you want me to release your father? I questioned. Isn't that obvious? I love my father. I love mine too, but if my father killed someone, I wouldn't want him broken out of prison. Ishmael, I'm a faithful daughter. I'm not accusing you of otherwise. I'm pointing out that your loyalty to your father is not enough of a reason to get me to release him. I think I figured you out, Kumi. You're a puppet master, through and through. You get your kicks from manipulating those around you. You didn't bring my father here to teach me a lesson on what it's like to not have one. You brought my father here to blackmail me into letting your father go. You tried to shift my focus onto Sam's wrongdoings and Levia's feelings, so that by proxy you'd seem like the only person without something to hide. But I see through you. That's not true, she cried. If I'm wrong, then you can prove it. Release my father now. Get rid of all of your bargaining chips. Show me the real Kumi, not the ideal fantasy girl that you think I'd love, and maybe I'll consider discussing your father's release. You're going to have to go through the same trial by fire that Sam does. You have to prove that I can trust you. Why are you being like this? She sniffed, wiping crocodile tears from her eyes. I thought you loved me. If you loved me, you wouldn't possibly treat me like this. If you loved me, you'd have no objections to my demands, I pointed out. I'm sorry, Kumi, but it's going to take more than looks and charm to make me love you. If I release your father, would you agree to release mine? I looked at her sternly. You didn't understand anything I just said, do you? This is not about me or you or your father. This is about you involving an innocent man who knew nothing of any of this. You grabbed my father against his will to use him as leverage against me. For me, that's the equivalent of putting a gun to his head and demanding I do what you want. So I'll repeat myself. Prove to me that you're better than that. Let him go. When I see him safe and gone, then you and I can discuss things further. It's not a guarantee that I'll say yes to releasing Behemoth. It's a guarantee that I'll be open to considering it. You're not making this easy for me, she pouted. Doing the right thing never is, I countered. This is so silly, she gasped, coming towards me. Ishmael, this is me you're talking about. I've never steered you wrong before. Think of what it was like for us in the airport. Didn't you feel some sort of connection? I know I did. I know you forged a connection to get my trust instead of earning it. I've given you my demand, Kumi. It's not a reasonable one, Ishmael. You're wanting me to give up everything for nothing? Don't you see how unfair you're being? My father didn't kill people, Kumi. My father has never harmed a hair on another individual's head, and you brought him into this. Use whatever justification you like. That's put us on bad terms, and I've told you how to fix it. You're not budging on this, are you? She murmured. Sorry, but I'm not. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, she sighed. I really hope we could just come to some understanding. I have no choice but to use your father as a sacrifice. Just remember, this is your fault, Ishmael. You could have avoided this. As she went to leave, I jabbed out my staff, blocking her path. My father will not be harmed. I gave you the chance to release him to show you had some decency in you. Now I'm telling you to release him in hopes that your self-preservation will make you see reason. She looked down at the staff, turning her head to regard me with an angry glare. You're threatening me? She scoffed. You are threatening me? Let's get something straight, Ishmael, she spat. With a quick sweep of her leg, I was taken off my feet. My eyes widened, and before I could hit the ground, she slammed her heel hard into my ribs. No one tells me no, and no one makes demands of me. I took a sharp breath, using my staff to get back on my legs. She managed to surprise me with her attack. I didn't realize she was so quick. I don't want to hurt you, Kumi, I tried. This is your last warning. Absolutely adorable, she chided. She flew at me in a flurry of martial arts-like strikes. Try as I might to dodge them, she struck repeated blows to my chest before grabbing the end of my staff. I opened my mouth to utter an incantation, but she spun towards me, striking me hard in the throat with her elbow. Choking on my air, she was easily able to wrench the rod from my grip. I fell to my knees, trying to breathe as she ran her fingers over the polished blue stone. I've always loved sapphires. They make wonderful jewelry, especially since so little scratches them. I wheezed as I tried to stand back up again, reaching for the only defense I truly had. With a flourish, she struck me hard across the jaw, driving me back to the floor. Deep breaths, she advised as I lay on the stone, hacking and coughing. I managed to reach into my pocket, grasping the metal bridle and calling Levia for help. No sooner had the mental command gone out than Kumi leaned closer to me, tilting my chin upward so I was staring into her eyes. How about one last kiss, lover? She purred, before pressing her lips against mine. As she did, I could feel the soul being sucked from my body. That's when I knew that this was the way that I would die. Outside, Levia and Sam stared down with Jack, who stood arms crossed. Are you sure about this, Levia? Sam asked quietly. You were the one who let him do this, Sam. Yeah, but I'm a little worried. You're right to be, the Kelpie agreed. Oi, what are you two talking about over there? Jack demanded. None of your business, they yelled in unison. He gave a huff, pulling out a cigarette to have a smoke. Looking to Sam, he gestured to the thing. Got a light? Sam had half a mind to hurl a fireball in his face for even asking. Noticing her irritability, he held up his hand in surrender and began to rummage around his pockets for a match. Levia shuddered for a moment as she felt Ishmael's hands touch her bridle. Half expecting a call to arms, she almost was relieved when instead she received an apologetic feeling. Something's weird, she commented to her companion. Ishmael's apologizing to me. For what? I don't honestly know, she answered. I'm not sensing any danger, though. Can you track Ishmael with your bridle? He told you about it? Relax. Your secret is safe with me, Sam assured her. I even got on to Ishmael for using it the way he did. I don't get you, Sam. One moment you hate me, the next you act like you're my friend. What gives? The Phoenix considered it for a moment. I still don't like you, she finally tried, though in truth she'd grown much closer to Levy over the last couple of days. But what was it you said at his dad's house? He likes you, so that means you can't be all bad. Thanks. I can track the bridle, not Ishmael. If someone else gets their hands on it, it could spell out big trouble for us. That's when she felt the sensation of something tugging at her consciousness. As she went rigid, Sam frowned. What is it? Exactly what I was worried about. Trouble. Olivia's eyes fell on Jack, who was lazily puffing on his cigarette. Can you handle him while I rush to Ishmael? Sure. Leave behind a trail of water so I can follow you once I'm finished with this moron, Phoenix requested. Consider it done. Before Jack could react, Levia had managed to pull up a large portion of the Nile, dragging it in her wake as she burst past him at high speeds. Jack seemed stunned before he went to give chase, but in doing so he'd forgotten about the Phoenix behind him. Sam slammed hard into his back, grabbing him with her talons and hurling him back into the river, a smirk on her face as she returned to her human form. It's just us now, Jack. Now how about I give you that light? Levia's hooves thundered along the stone floor of the temple as she rushed to find me. She could tell that I was close, and when she saw Chuck standing guard in the hallway that led to where her bridle was kept, she expected him to transform to stop her advance. Instead, she was surprised when he simply stepped aside, gesturing for her to pass. What game was it playing? She took the thought out of her head, eager to replace it with the more pressing concern of my cry for aid. Sure enough, when she tore through the curtain, it took her almost no time at all to realize my situation. Keeping her face, she transformed into her human form and smashed her shoulder into Kumi, sending her into the wall with a pained cry. Levia, she gasped, you were supposed to be outside. You didn't really think I'd send him in here by himself, did you? Levia growled. What is your problem, Kumi? Have you gone absolutely mental? You're siding with Behemoth after the way he's treated you your entire life? I knew you hated humans, but this is too far, even for you. Put out, she growled, lashing back at the Kelpie. Not all of us can run from our problems, Levia. Some of us had to stay and face them. We don't get the luxury of a 3,000-year-long nap. Levia bobbed and weaved in order to avoid the wicked scratches and punches that Kumi threw at her. Due to the vixen's aggressive assault, the Kelpie was forced to take the defensive. A nap? She argued. I didn't get any rest for a single one of those years. I had to be awake through all of it. Every second, every minute, every day, it was agony. I didn't get to taste the food I loved. I didn't get to enjoy the finer aspects of life. All I could do was watch and listen as the world changed around me. As the two fought and argued, my eyes went to the staff that had flown out of Kumi's hands when Levia hit her. I was so out of energy I thought I was about to pass out, and when I reached for the staff, I could see the spidery veins that came with old age. She'd sucked out my youth, and I could feel it, too. Kumi managed to get a nasty rake across Levia's chest with her claws, causing small, ruby-red drops of blood to ooze through her shirt. The Kelpie, however, managed to get a hit of her own end when she kicked the vixen hard in the stomach, forcing her to double over in pain. I crawled to the staff at an agonizing pace, trying my best to reach it. My eyes constantly flowed from it to the fight as I made my progress, hoping that Levia could last long enough that I could reach it and save us both. Or at least her, I thought. With the way my body felt, I wasn't sure I would be making it out of the temple. As she recovered, Kumi managed to see my movements. No! She cried, trying to intercept me, but she soon found herself interrupted when Levia hit her with a roundhouse kick that lifted her clear off her feet before slinging her against the back wall. Sure enough, when my fingers brushed the staff, I felt a surge of life power through me. I took a sharp breath of air as I got to my feet, my skin slowly tightening back to a more youthful appearance. With my energy partially replenished, I loomed over the crumpled Kumi, who tried to scramble away, despite having nowhere to escape to. Olivia, she whispered, come on, we're best friends. Please don't let him kill me. Please, I beg you. Oh, shut up, she blithed. You're not going to die and you know it. You're just acting scared so he'll pity you, but it won't work. I told you once, Kumi, Ishmael isn't the sort to fool with charms. So you do actually know her, I noted. That's one truthful thing that's come out of her mouth. All right, Kumi, spill. Where's my dad? I'm not telling, she huffed. The staff in my hand transformed into a long serpent that glared at her with an angry hiss. Okay, okay, she cried. He's in the 8th corridor on the left of the main hall. If you go that way and make a right, you'll reach the chamber he's in. The snake made a lunge at her face, causing her to yelp, but it stopped just short before hardening once more into the staff. Come on, Levia, I instructed. Let's get out of here. I'm sick of this place. Agreed, she nodded, trailing behind me. Ishmael, wait. Kumi called after me. I paused for a moment, turning my head slightly to listen to what she had to say. If I hadn't kidnapped your dad, you'd love me, right? I turned around with a scoff. Kumi, I could never love someone whose heart was as black as yours. You will never have a chance with me. She collapsed there, completely stunned by my declaration as the two of us went to leave. Alright, guys, chapter 20. Not much longer now. Where are my tissues? Ugh. God, I'm getting all snuffly. Chapter 20. You know what? Let's go ahead and finish it today. It's been about an hour, but let's go for the whole thing. Jack let out an angry snarl as he climbed out of the river, shaking the water from his wing-like arms. Listen here, girlie. You've just made a very nasty mistake. I swear to you, unless you get on your hands and knees and beg for mercy, I'll... His threats were interrupted as a massive fireball sent him back into the water, now with his clothes singed. I'm not afraid of you, Jack, Sam yawned. I've had pillow fights at sleepovers more dangerous than you. His blood was truly boiling now as he kicked off from the ground, his razor-sharp claws eager to tear into her flesh. Sam leapt away, causing him to strike the sand where she stood, only to find that it was now molten glass. He screeched, trying to leap away again, but the rapidly cooling material had forced him to stay rooted to the spot. You... That was a dirty trick, he growled, causing Sam to smirk. As he struggled to tear his hand free from the glass, she walked up to him and grabbed his nose. Got your nose, she taunted, moving out of the way just as he took a swipe at her. We'll have to continue this another time, Jack. Right now, I've got a princess who needs rescuing in the castle you're guarding. Best of luck to you. Giving a two-finger salute, she turned to leave before the sound of breaking glass alerted her to Jack's ambush. Turning back, she received a nasty slice across her cheek that made her cry out in pain, just as another blur left her with a gash on her opposite hip. As Jack slowed to a halt in front of her, he chuckled sinisterly, licking the blood from his claw. Don't patronize me, bird. I'm going to make a nice coat out of your pretty young skin. They don't call me Jack the Ripper for nothing. Oh, please, she chided. You think this is enough to do any real damage to me? I'm a phoenix, remember? Placing her fingers on her hip, flames coated the cut, and when she moved her hand, it simply was gone, now revealing her tanned skin. And you, Jack the Ripper? No way you're smart enough for that. That's enough. I am sick of your tongue, he screamed, diving for the phoenix. Sam stood her ground, waiting for the right moment. Just as he was about to reach her, she sent out a large cone of flames that engulfed him completely. He shrieked as his leather clothing melted onto his skin. Still, she refused to let up, driving him back towards the Nile. He swiped blindly at the flames, doing his best to defend himself, but with no success. When he was at the water edge, she finally stopped. That's what happens when you attack my friends, she stated. Now give it up. You can't beat me. You, I'll show you, he screeched just as a long tentacle lashed out to wrap around his waist. With a roar, the monstrous reptilian octopus emerged from the river, dragging the squirming Jack towards the bank. The phoenix dove for him, her fingers barely missing him just as the monster dragged him beneath the surface. His screams were muffled as the tentacle tightened around him, crushing his ribs with an audible crack. His eyes bulged as the grip continued to compress his torso, and soon his squirming came to an ominous halt just before he vanished beneath the waves. Sam waited a few moments for Momo, stop. I don't know if you guys could hear that. That was her trying to tear into my pack of Oreos that I have on my desk. She just, I guess, really wanted an Oreo. What is your issue, huh? Okay. Well, thank you for telling me that you're having issues. Although, next time you could say it with your words and not by tearing into my Oreos, huh? You've got lots of other toys to play with. You've got a scratching pad and like a little fish rod thingy. You've got an entire cat tower in the living room. Oh, she's going to the scratching pad now. As we call it, it's her anxiety pad. Don't look at me like that. Hmm. Sam waited a few moments, only to find that the monster did not return. If Leviathan knew where Behemoth's base was, and worse, was able to track their location as well, then things could be very, very bad. Turning back towards the entrance, she ran inside, following the trail of water that Levia left glistening on the stone floor. They had to get out before Leviathan could cut off their escape. No sooner had we gotten past the curtain than I lost my balance, sending me over on Levia. She quickly wrapped an arm around me, holding up my limp torso. Ishmael, what's wrong? I feel exhausted, I groaned. I can tell, she commented, holding me upright. What did she do to you? She kissed me. And you survived? She asked in shock. I let out a weak chuckle before groaning from the effort. I almost didn't. If you hadn't shown up when you did, I'd be a goner. You very well still might, a voice barked at... sorry, that's Chuck. You very well still might, a voice barked at the end of the hall. Through my blurred vision, I could see the fuzzy outline of Chuck's pinstripe suit blocking our exit. I was so hoping you'd be taken care of by Mistress Kumi. For too long, you've both been a thorn in my side. Still, she is a young whelp. I suppose it's only natural she would be blinded by her feelings. Move aside. Move aside, Levia ordered. We're getting Ishmael's dad, and we're getting out of here. Period. Chuck just ignored her threats, taking off his hat and tossing it aside. He ran his fingers through his jet-black hair, slicked back with some form of pomade. You see, Mr. Job, as you no doubt are aware, emotions are a powerful force. Desire, lust, friendship. These things drive men to do things that go against their instincts of survival. Do you know which of these emotions is the strongest, Mr. Job? Get behind me, Ishmael, Levia instructed, moving to stand between Chuck and myself. Your silence, Mr. Job, speaks volumes, he cackled sinisterly. I imagine in that naive little head of yours your answer is probably love or hope or some such foolishness. The most powerful emotion is fear. It is fear that drives us. It is fear that binds us. And fear, Mr. Job, is all that I will need to kill you and your little pet. Grasping his eye patch, he ripped it away. A nasty scar ran across the eye that had been hidden from sight, and when it opened, a chill rushed through my soul. I found myself unaware to look away from the horrible crimson orb. My body wanted to run. My entire existence screamed out to flee, but my body wouldn't move. It wasn't due to exhaustion. I was simply paralyzed by crippling fear. The look in his eyes was so grim, I might as well have been staring down death himself. Now then, which one should I handle first? He pondered, moving toward the both of us. Levia's body trembled slightly, but she wasn't able to move either. I must admit, Mr. Job, you've been quite the pest. Though I fear nothing has been as frustrating as your slick-back companion here. Moving to her, I was unable to do anything but watch as he ran his hand up her bare arm. I must admit, she is a lovely little thing, he mused. Truly is a shame she was born on the wrong side of the tracks. Such a pretty face, wouldn't you agree? He asked, gripping her chin and roughly tugging it so I could see. Tears were streaming down her cheeks as she looked at me pleadingly. Despite that she couldn't speak, the request that I help her was loud and clear. Ishmael, she managed to wheeze out before Chuck grasped her throat tightly. Watch, Mr. Job. I want you to witness your friend as the life slowly fades from her eyes. Your fear, your emotions, they make you powerless. She will die, and you will be unable to even lift a finger, and it is all because you are weak. She began to gasp, trying to breathe as the grip on her windpipe began to tighten. Her fingers flexed wildly, trying to will herself to move, but all she could do was tremble in fear as her brain demanded oxygen. Please, I begged to God. You gave me this staff. Why won't you help me? Don't you care about Levia? Even if you don't, I do, so please help. There was, of course, no response. The tears came harder now as I gripped my staff. I had to overcome my fear. Fear of what? I asked myself. The thought echoed for a moment, and it was then that I realized I didn't have an answer to the question. I was no more afraid of Chuck than I was before he removed his eye patch. My nightmares flashed before my eyes again. I could feel my fingers starting to twitch in rhythm with Levia's. She wouldn't die. I wouldn't let this mud of all people be the one I couldn't stop. Just as her eyes began to flutter shut, I used all my will to rush forward, and I punched Chuck as hard as I could in his smug face. As if a spell had been lifted, she began to cough again, sinking to her knees so that her body could focus all of its energy on breathing. Impossible, Chuck snarled, standing up and glaring at me with his wicked eye. I swung at him again and again until finally my fist crashed into the eye that had paralyzed Levia and I with its gaze. He let out a blood-curdling howl as he stumbled back from me. There's something more powerful than fear, I growled. Hatred. I hate you, Chuck. I began screaming at him like a madman as I grasped the staff and began to beat him with it mercilessly. I hate this stupid mission. I hate that my best friend lies to me. I hate that my crush tried to kill me. He transformed into the monstrous wolf he truly was and pounced on me. The staff, along with my fury, gave me strength, and I easily rolled over so I was sitting on his stomach, jamming the rod sideways into his mouth. I hate that God ignores me. I hate that innocent people are dying because of it. I hate that my father has been roped into this mess. He managed to force me off by using his hind legs to kick my chest. When he did, he tried again to lunge at me, but I swung the staff like a bat, striking him in the chest and carrying him with all of my strength to slam him against the wall. As he began to gasp and wheeze, I could feel angry salt drops flooding my vision. I hate giant birds. I hate stupid shark lizards. I screamed, slamming the back of his head against the stone over and over again with each statement. I hate manipulative foxes. I hate this stupid life. I wish every last one of you monsters would crawl back under the rock you came from and just die. With a final crack, he crumpled to the ground, dizzy but still alive. You think you're the only one capable of instilling fear, Chuck? I'll show you the greatest fear there is. I'm going to send you straight to the depths of hell where you belong. I raised the staff high, igniting it in dark flames that seemed to drain the light from the room. Ishmael, no! Levia cried, grabbing my arms and restraining me. Don't do it! Let me go! I screeched, desperate to give the final blow. Levia threw her arms around me, and like that, I stopped. As she hugged me close, my rage melted away into unfiltered hurt. I began to bawl into her neck. I hate him, I sobbed. I hate him so much. I know. It's okay. It's over now. You saved me, okay? See? I'm safe. With my fervor gone, I found myself once more struggling to walk. Levia helped me to limp down the hallway. Chuck had no plans of letting us leave, however. A low growl caught my attention just in time to push Levia clear of his charge. As he sailed through the air where he'd stood, I drove my staff down onto his back and forced him to the ground. You should have stayed down when you had the chance, Chuck. Tactus Sanctorum! This time, when I touched my staff to his hind leg, there was a sound like ice cubes in a warm drink. Chuck collapsed onto his side, screaming in pain. The bones in his leg had just been reduced to powder, and I made sure he felt every crack. As he turned back into his human form, he stared in horror at his malformed leg, now little more than a flap of muscle and skin. Levia looked just as shocked as he was. He won't be following us any more, I murmured, stepping over him and continuing down the hall, using my staff to brace myself. Just as I reached the hallway, Sam soared straight up to me before stopping short. Ishmael, thank goodness you're okay, she sighed in relief. Where's Levia? Here, she called, carefully avoiding the now whimpering hellhound. We have a problem, Sam explained. Leviathan knows where we are. One of her goons just snagged Jack in the middle of our fight. What did it look like? Levia asked. Like a T-Rex with an octopus for a face, she replied. It grabbed Jack, and before I could get him, it crushed him like a tin can before dragging him under. It was the Lao. We should be fine for now. It doesn't like to come on land. Still, the sooner we get out of here, the better. Sam, get Ishmael's dad and get him out of here. 8th corridor on the left in the main hall. Take the right fork. Where are you two going to go? She asked. To seal Behemoth. The Phoenix nodded in understanding, taking off down the corridor and leaving Levia and me behind. Come on, Ishmael, Levia muttered. Let's go. I nodded, limping along beside her. As Sam flew down the corridor, she found that the underground tunnels were shrinking around her. When she felt her wings brushing against the walls on either side, she transformed again, taking off in a jog that the direction Levia indicated. No sooner had she stepped from the main path than she felt a huge rumble beneath her feet that made her blood freeze in her veins. She didn't need to know what that sound meant. Somewhere deep within the recesses of her mind, her very soul knew what had made that sound. Uttering a silent prayer for Ishmael, she pushed forth, moving further inward. When she reached the fork, she went right, and it wasn't long before she could see the flickering of light that indicated a larger chamber. As the room opened up, her eyes flowed past the bloody pulp on the floor to the older man chained to the wall, his head bowed in defeat. Mr. Job, she cried excitedly, running to his side. Don't worry, I'm going to get you out of here, she promised. He groaned, opening his eyes to see the redhead. Sam, what are you doing here? Long story short, rescuing you. Leave, he coughed. There's a monster guarding me. Indeed there is, a voice purred behind her. Turning on her heels, Sam came face to face with the Sphinx. You have made a mistake wandering into my lair, human. Sammy stayed silent, slowly stepping away from Ishmael's father. So, how does this work? She asked, her eyes not leaving the Sphinx's. You tell me a riddle. I have to answer it to free him. She scoffed. You're thinking of my Greek sister, the lion-like creature explained. I prefer to do things more directly. Behind her, her tail swished in excitement. It was then Sam realized that it didn't appear as a lion's tail, but had a scaly exterior and quills that branched out for it. You're not just a sphinx, she noted. Very observant, she cooed. I am known by other names. Chimera, Manticore, Satyril. You, however, may call me Sashta, for the short time you are alive. Sam, she introduced back, and I'm not nearly as helpless as you think I am. I managed to get in here, didn't I? You think besting those two buffoons at the gate makes you a threat to me? Little girl, I have lived since the time of pharaohs. I have killed more of your pathetic race than there are stars in the sky. You do not stand a chance against me. If you say so, Sammy replied. Sam, what are you doing? Mr. Job asked. Run. You can't beat her. She said nothing as the Sphinx dove for her. She continued to sidestep her, avoiding her wicked slashes with her claws. You're pretty quick for a human, Sashta stated, the two creatures circling one another. I wonder how you'll taste going down. You'll have to catch me to find out, Sam taunted, just before she saw the Sphinx's tail flick towards her. She narrowly avoided the quills, a volley of them embedding into the wall behind her. Very spry indeed. Sashta began a furious assault on the Phoenix, pouncing and leaping with angry snarls as she continued to fail to rake her opponent with her claws. Stand still, you annoying monkey, she roared at Sam. With one more attack, she managed to fling her quills in anticipation of Sam's movements, and when they embedded into her legs, she smirked. How does my venom feel, human? Can you feel it freezing your limbs? It greatly helps when I'm consuming larger prey such as yourself. Don't worry, I prefer to swallow my food whole, so you won't feel a thing. Well, until you're digested in my juices. It should only take about a week or so. Sammy stood there, struggling to move as the manticore's jaw distended like a snake, engulfing her head first. No, Ishmael's father cried as the Sphinx tilted back her head, slowly gulping down the fiery redhead until she was gone completely within her massive body. Delicious, she commented, smacking her chops. She had quite the interesting flavor. You damned monster, he roared. She was just a kid. You could have let her go. Why did you kill her? I have my orders, she hummed. Don't worry, you'll see her again. Once you've outlived your usefulness, I've no doubt Mistress Kumi will grant you to me as a reward. It will be quite the feast. I have to say, her flavor is unique. She tastes a little like chicken. I wonder what you will taste like. Perhaps just a little sample, for curiosity's sake. Moving to Mr. Job's face, her long, rough tongue ran from his stomach over his tattered shirt and across his face. He grimaced at the feeling, trying hard to hide the tears that were forming in his eyes. You're a demon, he muttered. Nothing but a vile creature that should be cast into hell to burn for eternity. The Nihilist laughed. I fear that the devil will be waiting for a long time to meet me with his flames. That was when she felt a strange sensation. Her body suddenly felt very flushed, like she had a fever, and it was only getting worse. I think the girl gave me some indigestion, she commented with a grumble. It has been some time since I last feasted on a human. Ishmael's father was silent, his eyes wide as he watched the vague outline of his son's friend glowing brightly from inside of the beast's gut. What? What is this? The Sphinx roared as the heat became unbearable from within. Stop! Stop it! I demand you to stop it! She tried desperately to escape the intense burning that came from within her, clawing at her own stomach in an attempt to remove the source. You damned human, what are you doing? Stop! That was when smoke began to pour from her mouth and nose. Her yowls of pain echoed through the chamber at a deafening volume as she rolled here and there, blood pouring from her self-inflicted wounds until finally her entire body burst into flames. With a loud shriek, she fell to the ground, laying there as the colorful flames consumed her body completely until she was nothing but a pile of ash. Sam stood from the dust, shaking herself clean with a grimace. That was disgusting, she complained, plucking out the thin quills from her leg and flicking them away. I don't think I've ever had to go that hot before. Remembering herself, she rushed to her friend's father to let him down. What just happened? What did you do? He asked in shock. Just who are you? Relax, Mr. Job. Sam smiled politely at him. It's still me. You've known me since I was a little girl. You just didn't know that I was a magical bird of prey is all. Grasping hold of the manacles, she held them until the locks melted before tearing them open. And you're free. You're he stammered. A phoenix. Yes, Mr. Job, she sighed. The man was so surprised by it he couldn't even string coherent thoughts together. Come on, Ishmael and Levia are waiting for us. We're going to get you somewhere safe, she swore. Levia, is she a monster too? Yes, though, just for the record, the proper vernacular is cryptid. Don't worry, Mr. Job, we're the good guys. Our priority is get you out and make sure. Her words were interrupted by another violent tremor. That doesn't get loose. Can you walk? I think so, he stammered. For good measure, Sam looped her arm around the older man and helped him to hobble out of the chamber, leaving behind the smoking pile of ash that had once been his captor. Alright, guys, we're getting really close to the end here. Chapter 21. I hope you guys are enjoying this enough. Sorry, I'm excited. It's been a while since I've actually read out loud for people, and I really enjoy doing it. So this is great. I just hope I'm not being loud enough that I'm waking up my roommate or something. It is still only 4 in the morning here. Excuse me. Whatever little energy I'd had before was almost completely diminished by the time I got halfway down the hall. If Olivia hadn't propped me up, I'd have fallen over long ago, but I still managed to be able to trudge onward with her help. You didn't have to do that, she finally whispered to me. What? I slurred. What are you talking about? When my legs gave out from under me, she carefully lowered me to the ground and placed me to sit against the wall. What you did to Chuck, she explained. It's better than what he deserves, I wheezed before coughing heavily. Olivia frowned as she sat beside me. What are you doing? We have to keep going. What's the point? She murmured. Humans won't change. Why did I ever think they would? You can't back out of this now, I tried. If you want to keep going, I'm not going to stop you, she said coldly. I don't have to help you. Where is this coming from? I've made this mistake before, Ishmael, she said. I followed a man who was really a monster, and I'm not going to do it again. You sank to Chuck's level, and that's the worst thing you could do. You're supposed to be a servant of God. I'm not asking you to be perfect, but I'm asking you to try. Halfway through, my eyes closed and I slumped over. I was so tired, so exhausted. Whatever Kumi had done to me, it was destroying me from the inside. Ishmael? Levia asked. I didn't even have the strength to respond. Ishmael, she cried, this time in more of a panic. Don't fall asleep. Stay awake. Come on, stay with me. As she shook me, I gave a groan, my eyes fluttering open weakly. You seriously need to have a talk about your taste in women, she grumbled, grabbing my hand and wrapping it around the staff. Holding it against my chest, she frowned. Ishmael, I need you to pay attention to me, okay? I nodded my head to show I understood. What are we doing? Getting you back to normal, she answered, closing her eyes to try to remember the spell she was thinking of. Okay, I'm going to guide the staff for you. Just repeat after me. She began to move my hand in a slow circle over my head as I struggled to follow along. Spiritus meus. Spiritus meus, I murmured. In May, she continued. In May. Above me, I could see a small, spinning gray vortex. Like a tornado, it seemed to be blowing down towards me rather than sucking things into it. It pierced straight into my mouth and nose, filling my lungs. Exhalant mortem. Exhalant mortem, I gasped, black, wispy tendrils spiraling around the gray as it was pulled from my body. Ita und passent vivere. Ita ut passent vivere, I concluded. As soon as the last syllable left my lips, my chest seized outward, flooding with a sensation that I could not explain. All tiredness left my body, and it felt as if I'd just woken up from a very long nap. Better? She asked. I nodded. Let's go get Behemoth, I suggested. Ishmael, no. I'm not going to help you. Turning to her, I took her hands in mine. Levia, you know me. What I did to Chuck was awful, true, and I'm sorry I scared you, but you know that I would never hurt you. It's not me that I'm worried about. I sighed. Look, we'll table this conversation for now. I can't do this without you, and if we leave, there may increase security to the point we can't ever come back. There was another resounding thud that vibrated beneath our feet. That was all the convincing she needed. Okay, promise me we'll talk about this. I promise. Then let's go. As we ran, I could feel my heart racing in my chest. Finally, I'd be able to finish this whole mess. Once he was sealed away, I'd have taken my first step towards returning to my normal life. He's not far away, Levy announced. Behind that wall up ahead is where Job sealed him all those years ago. Do you recall the spell to open the library? I believe so, surprisingly. Trace the symbol with the staff and use the spell to open the chamber. As if an old locker combination, I held the staff high and moved it solely by memory to trace out the horn symbol. As it flared to light, awaiting my command, I hesitated. What's wrong? Olivia asked. I don't know. I whispered, it's all just too real now. I feel as if I'm about to meet the devil himself. How does one feel about that? I'm scared because of how powerful he is. I'm relieved to know that I haven't been fighting a shadow. And I'm anxious because I can finally remove him from the board altogether. I took another breath to steel myself. I didn't have a choice. I couldn't wait until I was fully prepared to face him because I doubted I would ever be. Notam fac mihi viam. Just as before, the symbol unwove itself like a mechanism unlocking a door, and the brick rearranged itself to allow me to pass through it. Stepping inside, my eyes lifted to the enormous figure that stood in the chamber. I hadn't even realized we'd traveled so far below the earth as to allow it to fit, yet there it was. The sculpture was unlike anything I had ever seen, as if someone took the most horrifying traits of every animal and put them together into one beast. Horns jutted from its face in a multitude of directions. He had two in his mouth, curved up like a warthog. Another pair jutted out from beside his chin like an elephant, which were mirrored by an identical pair on his head like a bull's. The final three, bringing the count up to 9, started on the tip of his rhinoceros-like snout, with a smaller one just behind it, and the last jutting straight from his forehead like some sort of demonic unicorn. His back was covered in weird armored plates like an armadillo, but his torso and chest were protected by a thick, ape-like hide. The large, muscular arms at his side ended in wicked-looking claws I could only describe as like Wolverine's from X-Men. I was certain no natural beast had such weapons, and his legs were so strong and thick that they had to end in stump-toed hooves akin to an elephant. Finally, as if the beast could not be any more possessive, it possessed a long tail that was coated in leaf-like quills all down its length, so that it looked almost like a flexible tree. It's him, Olivia murmured. This is Behemoth. Somehow I thought he'd be taller, I joked nervously, trying to lighten the mood, until that massive tail suddenly rose up and slammed down hard into the ground, releasing it to be the source of the violent quakes we'd been feeling throughout the temple. No sense of humor, I noted. Okay, Behemoth, I called out. I think you know who I am. My name is Ishmael. I am the son of Job, and I am here to pass judgment on you. Ishmael, what are you doing? Olivia hissed. Holding my staff high, I ignored her question, allowing the brazen casing around most of his body to crack and crumble from him so that he could speak. I know who you are, human, he snarled. How dare you to intend to claim that you are powerful enough to judge me? Save the bravado, I shot back. His eyes turned to Levia. Leaning forward onto his forelimbs, he gave a slight snort that sent hot air rushing past us. I'll be damned. Levia, is that you? Hello, Behemoth, she greeted, less than cheerfully. I thought you were dead, he mused. As if you could be so lucky, she scoffed. Do not be so unfamiliar, child. You know you've always been like a daughter to me. You have? I asked her, confused. Kumi and I were once very close, she explained. Like sisters, Behemoth chimed. Tell me, Levia, who is this young whelp who seeks to address me as my superior? I will gladly crush him underfoot if he has been a nuisance to you. Watch who you threaten, Behemoth, I argued. If you ever want to be freed from your seal, you had better change your tone and do so quickly. I'm here to negotiate release, but I have terms. I do not bargain with pathetic humans. Levia's treachery may have worked to seal me before, but I promise you, child, you will have no power over me. Kneel before my might. Submit before me, and I will consider killing you quickly. That is my negotiation. You will not lay a finger on him, Daddy. Levia and I took up defensive stances as Kumi made her way past us into the chamber. Princess, you and I can discover this after my business is settled with the human, Behemoth tried. Okay, sweetheart? No, she argued, puffing her cheeks in irritation. Do not talk back to me, child. I am your father, and you will show me some respect. Then you should respect me enough to not kill my human, she protested. Turning back to face me, her golden eyes glowed with an impish desire. I will offer you one last chance, Ishmael. Join me. Be my prince. Kumi, Behemoth shouted. Hush, Daddy, she snapped, raising her hand to silence him, her eyes never leaving mine. Your choice, Ishmael. Join the host, or die like a lamb in the slaughter. With my frustration mounting, I raised my staff high. I've got my choice right, hero, I snarled as divine energy began to bloom forth from it. Before I could utter one incantation, though, Behemoth's tail cracked like a whip, wrapping around the staff and plucking it from my grasp before I could even comprehend what had happened. No! I cried, running for it, but Levia quickly stopped me, just as Behemoth brought down his massive foot and shattered my only weapon into splinters. Now what is your choice? Kumi taunted. Ishmael, we need to get out of here, Levia growled. But I began to protest. Now, she cried, pulling me out of the way of Behemoth's tail as he flung it down where I stood. Daddy, Kumi snapped, don't hurt him. Levia transformed, grasping my shirt in her teeth. With a surprising amount of force, she threw me over her back, so I was stuck to her body like a sandbag, and rushed towards the exit. We need to go, Ishmael. We can seal him later. Right now, we need to get you to safety. Behemoth gave an enraged roar as he began to give chase. At first, I thought he would be too big to fit through the entryway, but when he shrunk, I stilled any protest that I had for fleeing. Let me climb up, I instructed her as she began to gallop towards the exit. As soon as I unadhered, I swung my leg over her back, righting myself before sticking to her once more. Where's Dad and Sam? We need to get them out of here, too. Here, Sam called just as they reached the main corridor ahead of us. Red, clear us a path. It looks like Behemoth doesn't intend to let us go without a fight, Levia commanded as beasts of all sorts began to pour into the chamber. Got it, she called back, bursting into flames and soaring off. My stunned father wasn't sure what to respond to first, but thankfully was lucid enough to take my arm when I offered it to him. Come on, Dad, we're getting out of here, I shouted, pulling him onto Levia's back behind me. Ishmael, Sam's a phoenix, I know. Stop them, Daddy, Kumi shouted, stomping her foot. Behemoth charged through the temple behind us, slamming his big, meaty claws through the stone walls like they were cardboard. Keep your head low. He's trying to bring the temple down on top of us, cried Levia. Sam barreled through the monsters coming to stop us, her flames leaving a fiery trail of destruction in her wake that Levia easily trampled over. Turning to look back, I could see Behemoth was gaming on us as Kumi cheered him on from behind. He's getting closer, Levia. Almost there, she promised. Sam blasted out of the temple, leaving the rest of the way clear. We were going to make it. When Behemoth stopped, I was certain he knew so too. That was when he opened his mouth. His tongue lashed towards us the same way a chameleon's would, though his was pointed with a hard, bony barb. My dad went rigid for a moment before looking down at himself to see that blood was now pouring from his chest. Levia came to a sudden stop as Behemoth began to reel his tongue back in, making my dad scream in agony. Hold on, Dad. Levia's going to get us out of here. Just hold on. I could hear Levia trying with all her strength to fight Behemoth, but he was just so much stronger by comparison that she was being dragged back across the stony floor. My father shuddered from the vicious tug of war with his torso. Blood had started dripping from his mouth as I desperately tried to free him from the barb. Son, he gurgled, We're going to get out, Dad. Sam can heal your wounds. It'll be okay. Just hold on. Still, we continued being dragged back towards Behemoth's clutches. Ishmael, I can't hold on, Levia said. We have to let him go. You can do it, I told her. Please, just keep pulling. I'm sorry. Levia, no, don't. Our speed changed the moment my father came loose from her back. I turned, trying to reach for him. Just a little closer, and I'd have him. I just had to touch him. One touch, and I could grab him, and we'd escape. But it was too late. He was just out of reach. As Levia galloped off, the last thing I saw was my father lying on the ground, just before Behemoth's enormous foot splattered him on the temple floor. The air around us instantly changed. It felt heavy and thick as the ethereal shackles that had glimmered into existence around Behemoth suddenly shattered away into nothing. He gave a roar that was so loud it shook the earth, enough that I could feel it through Levia. As she rushed past the Nile, heading once more for the Red Sea, I watched the events that were unfolding in horror. Behemoth grew and grew, shattering the temple around him, before he soon stood the size of a skyscraper. Letting out another bellowing cry, he pounded his chest in victory to show that he was the one who had triumphed. He escaped his prison, and there would be no putting him back. Instead of pursuing us, Behemoth turned north towards Cairo. Each step he took made the ground quake, and I knew that I had failed. The Trine War had started once again, and there was nothing that I could do about it any more. Ishmael, Levia murmured to me, what's the plan? Where do we go? It doesn't matter, so long as it isn't here, I replied. The rest of our ride was spent in silence. When she rushed back over the Red Sea, this time there was no monster, no conflict, nothing to potentially reunite me with my father. Once we reached the other side, we could see Sam flying in circles overhead like a beacon in the night sky. Levia's pace slowed as we came closer, and once we'd reached the oasis that Sam had discovered, she landed beside us. What happened? She asked. How did Behemoth come free? Slipping off of the Kelpie's back, I just jerked my thumb at her. Ask Levia, I growled. Before Sam could question me further, I stormed off to scale the small cliff from where a waterfall fed the pool. Sitting on the ledge, I dangled my feet over and covered my face with my hands. Tears were falling now, much later than they should have been. Levia? Sam asked with a look of concern on her face. Where's Mr. Job? The Kelpie remained quiet for a moment, and Sam knew that her fear was reality. Looking up at me over her shoulder, I knew she wanted to say something. With a sigh, Levia turned and walked off in the other direction, sitting on a stone so she wouldn't have to look me in the eyes and admit what she'd done. Sam stood between us, looking first to me, then to Levia, trying to decide which of us to handle first. I'm going to get us some kindling, she announced at last, deciding to avoid the conversation. I watched as Sam silently collected branches and palms to construct the fire, and when she'd finished the task of lighting it, she walked off once more. At first, I thought that perhaps she just decided to go elsewhere where the tension wasn't so thick, but when I heard her footsteps behind me, I knew I was wrong. Without a word, she sat beside me, dangling her legs just as I had. At first, no words were exchanged between us. I actually hoped it would stay that way. Having Sam close provided small comfort, but I knew the moment she opened her mouth that comfort would be gone. After a few minutes, she whispered, Ishmael? What do you want, Sam? I asked. For you to talk to me? I'm not in the mood to talk right now. I don't think you'll ever be in the mood if I don't push you to do it. It hurts, Ishmael. I know it does. This is the first step to making it hurt less. What difference does it make? We're all going to die now. Behemoth won. Humanity lost. It's over. Who cares if it hurts or not? In a few weeks, I won't feel anything anymore. Don't talk like that, she begged. I need you to believe there's a chance still. You're the optimist, Ishmael, not me. I always struggle to see the silver lining. It's what I count on you for. So please, don't tell me there's no hope. I was silent for a few moments. Sorry, Sammy. Sometimes a cloud has nothing behind it but the dark. With nothing else she could think of, Sam wrapped her arms around me. I know it's hard, but please don't forget that I'm here for you. Levia is too. No, she's not. You are right the entire time. She can't be trusted. I should have listened to you from the very beginning. As she pulled from me, she had a frown on her face. What happened? Please tell me. She left him behind. She sacrificed my dad to Behemoth. Why would she do that? Ask her. How am I supposed to know? Sam gave a slight huff. I think you do, but you just won't say. You don't know. You weren't there, grumbled. No, but I know Levia, and I know you. You mean more to her than her own life does. I didn't respond. Reaching over, she turned me to look into her eyes. You're blaming the wrong people, Ishmael. So it's my fault? I scoffed, pulling away from her in disgust. I didn't say that. Well, if it's not mine and it's not Levia's, then it must be yours. I spat. In fact, if my father hadn't been captured, he'd still be safe at his house. He was captured under your watch, Sam, so whose fault is it really? She took a sharp breath, trying to collect herself. I know you're only saying that because you're sad and hurt. I know you're angry that this happened, but the worst thing for you now is to be alone. Don't push us away, Ishmael, for your own sake. After falling quiet again for some time, I finally began to weep. Sobbing into my hands, I felt such a cluster of feelings that I wished for once God would make it so I couldn't feel anything. If I were to die, at least then the pain would go away. I could feel Sam rubbing my back reassuringly, showing her support as she always did. What am I going to do, Sam? My father is dead. Behemoth is going to destroy Egypt, and with it millions of people. This was my responsibility. I was supposed to be the one who stopped this from happening. I can't save the world. I couldn't even save one person. No one can save them all, she reminded me. I sniffed, wiping my eyes on the back of my hand. Through the blurry, salty tears, I could see Levia still sitting on the rock. Part of me wondered if she was crying too. I don't think I can do this, Sammy. Now I've lost both of my parents. What am I going to do? How could you possibly deal with this? Well, I had a pretty good friend, she explained with a smile. Real goofy guy. Really smart sometimes, but man, could he get under my skin in the worst of ways. They say that's how you know someone's a real friend is when they annoy you so much you can't decide if you want them to stay or if you want them to leave you alone. Well, he left me alone. What? I gasped. What are you talking about? I never. 2 years, Ishmael, Sammy interrupted. It was 2 years after I moved to Galveston that you finally called me to check on how I was doing. I thought you wanted to be alone. I did. Then it's not about what we want, Ishmael. It's about what we need. I needed you then. Those 2 years were miserable for me. I was working all day, every day at a stupid theme park. I didn't have friends. I didn't go out. I went home, slept, went to work. Did that every day for 2 years. And then you called me. I'm sorry, Sam. Don't be. You need to hear this story. After those 2 years, I was still in a lot of pain, Ishmael. I considered killing myself. I know I'd just come back, but at least it helped me forget. I had the news ready and everything. On that day, you called me. For the first time in 2 years, we spoke on the phone. It was just stupid stuff, too. Things like the weather and TV. That's when I realized I couldn't leave you behind. I was in absolute shock. I couldn't believe what she was saying. Why didn't you ever tell me? I asked. Sam, I thought you were doing great. I thought everything was okay, and if you were hurting so badly, why didn't you just talk to me? Why won't you talk to Levia? She countered. I tried to forget about you. I blamed my parents' death for being sad. Then I blamed you for not being there for me. I blamed everyone I could, and all that blame got me was more sadness. Don't blame anybody for this. If you do, it will just hurt you more. But if you need someone to blame, I recommend picking someone who isn't a friend. Behemoth, I growled under my breath. Exactly. Now go down there and talk to her. She probably blames herself twice as much as you do. She needs to hear from you that it wasn't her fault. When you're done, then we can say a few words for your dad. I hugged my best friend tight. Thank you, Sam. You really are the best. I know, but it's still nice of you to say, she teased. Now go on. And if you two make out, I'm going to be pissed. That brought a weak smile to my face. Even after everything, I still could smile. Just one last thing. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. Believe me, you've more than made up for it, she whispered. Standing up from my spot, I made my way back down the cliff before approaching Levia. I swallowed, unsure of what to say. Unable to come up with something clever or smooth, I approached her and cleared my throat. Can I sit here? Sure, she responded solemnly, moving to stand up. I'll find somewhere else. Reaching up, I grabbed her hand, stopping her and pulling her back down to the rock. No, I want to sit with you, I explained. Look, I'm not entirely sure where to start. She remained silent, staring at her feet. How about I'm sorry? I suggested, hoping to get some sort of smile from her. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean you. I'm the one who is sorry. I'm sorry that I blamed you. It's not your fault. It feels like my fault, she admitted. I'm the one who let him go. If I hadn't, if you hadn't, we'd all be dead, I chastised. You saved me. Again. I'm sorry I was so nasty to you. Honestly, I think he was already gone when you let him go. Really? The sound of the wind rustling through the fronds highlighted the awkward pause between us. My dad and I, we never really got along. What you saw was the most civil we'd ever been. I know he loved me, and I loved him too. If he was the one making the choice, I'm certain he'd have wanted you to let him go too. It hurt for me to say, but the words rang true. My father would have sacrificed himself a dozen times over for me. What changed your mind? Asked Levia. Sam, believe it or not. I think you're growing on her. She's not so bad, I guess. We stayed like that for a few more minutes, just staring off in the distance towards Egypt. The Kelpie tilted her head to rest it on my shoulder, and I in turn did the same. It's hard to believe it's over. Did Job ever have this problem? Yes, she admitted. He had all three of them unsealed at once. Just because Behemoth is free, that doesn't mean this is the end. Even without the staff, the fight is far from over. I'm sure we'll think of something, I sighed. We always do. We? That was my way of subtly asking for you to stay with me. From now on, Levia, I'm going to be the best key I can for my dad. She smiled at me. You're one strange guy, Ishmael, but I'm still here for you. Standing up, I took her hands in mine and pulled her to her feet. Come on, I suggested. Let's move on to Israel. I'm starving. I don't think I've eaten since we were in that cage, and birdseed just doesn't cut it. Levia finally laughed out loud. Sounds good. I'm pretty hungry myself. I could use a nice bath, too, though I'd much rather wait until we're in Turkey. Amen to that, I agreed. Waving to Sam, the three of us set off again. Levia was right. Behemoth may have won the battle today, but I refuse to let him win the war. So that is chapter 21, the last chapter. But we do have an epilogue. And so, here is our epilogue. Alright. And with that, that'll be the end of Behemoth. Halfway across the world, a man with long, sandy hair that wove into a beard under his chin sat at a bar. His finger ran along the rim of the glass of water set in front of him. With every completed lap, the water would grow a little more pinkish in hue until finally it was a purplish red. No one noticed the odd transformation, though. All of the denizens were too busy focusing on the news bulletin that was blaring from the TV. The ticker tape beneath the live footage that depicted the carnage and destruction read, Giant beast appears in Egypt. Hundreds of thousands killed. Military intervention unsuccessful. That CGI looks pretty realistic, don't it? One of the patrons laughed nervously. The others around muttered words of agreement. Yes, sir. Technology seems to be improving constantly. Downing the glass of wine before placing the empty glass upside down on the bar, the blonde-haired man stood. Stepping outside, he approached a motorcycle parked just in front of the small saloon. Before he could start it, a drunk stumbled up to him and clutched his arm. Got money for a drink, brother? He hiccuped. You've had enough, brother, the man retorted. I apologize, but my coffers are not to be thrown away for such wasteful delights. That's when the bum suddenly drew a serrated knife. Sure about that, brother? I'm feeling mighty thirsty. Now let's see your wallet. Giving a heavy sigh, the man placed his kickstand down again and stood from his bike. The mugger took a step back from him in case he tried to pull something. Having seen his victim's large, chiseled physique, no amount of liquid courage would override the drunk's caution. Friend, I will give you one chance, the biker uttered. Drop your weapon, return to wherever you call home, and give thanks you did not pursue this matter further. You a cop? He slurred. Must I be one to protect you from perishing from dreadful judgment? Taking that as a no, the drunk lashed out with the blade towards the man. Simply raising his hand to block the attack, the dirty blonde barely felt the knife as it shattered against his palm. Bits of metal fell to the ground, leaving his hand pristine. The bum looked at what would now only consisted of a handle before swinging with his fist. His hand made contact with his jaw, but the biker didn't even flinch. An audible crack signaled that the attacker had broken his hand against his flesh. Very well, he sighed, reaching out and grasping the horrified man by the face. He lifted him from the ground with one hand, the bum's legs kicking in panic as light seemed to flood from under the stranger's fingertips. A painful scream was choked in the drunk's throat as smoke rose from his skin. After another moment, the man dropped his attacker to the ground, leaving him as a charred, blubbering mess. His eyes had boiled in their sockets, and there were horrible burns where the man's hand had been, but the bum was alive at least. Leaning closer, the biker placed his hand on the man once more, this time gently on his shoulder. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, he uttered to the unconscious man, for many who have done so have entertained angels without being aware. Hebrews 13:2. Going to leave, he paused to examine a chain around the man's neck. On it was a pendant that depicted a winged man wielding a sword, one foot on a serpent beneath him. The biker gave a half chuckle before placing it back against the man's chest. Climbing onto his bike, he started it up and took off towards Galveston again. He was on a mission, and nothing would get in his way. Nothing. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of Book 1, Behemoth of the Trine Wars. Thank you guys so much for sticking by me and coming with me on this journey. I have almost nothing written of Ziz, unfortunately. Otherwise, I would continue reading it for you guys. I have some other books, so maybe I'll read one of those sometime whenever we have another day. But for now, it's about time to head to bed. Thank you guys again so much for joining me, and I hope that you enjoyed my reading. I hope that my voices have improved. I know today I was a little bit off because my throat's kind of dry and I'm all sniffly and stuffed up. But I had fun, and I hope that you guys had fun too. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to me read, and I hope you all sleep well. Thank you so much.